Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Talking Tradesman podcast. Today we have a very special guest in the studio with us today. We have Meg Richards, who is my regional branch of Samaritans acting director. Hello, Meg.
Hi, Russ. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much for making the effort to come in today. Really appreciate it. So, Meg, if we roll back a little bit, how long have you been in Samaritans?
I started 9.5 years ago. So that would have been September 2012,
Well done.
2014. Is that right? Yes, 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started my training then. So, yeah,
And
quite a
you've
long time now.
Yeah, no, well done. I mean, it all credit to you for giving up your time for that amount of time. And not only that, the fact that you've actually made it and ran as branch director, which is a whole other level of volunteer commitment, which obviously is totally unpaid. So, yeah, if I can ask, what was the thing that made you decide to volunteer for Samaritans?
It was something I'd always wanted to do all of my life. But my work life and my family life didn't allow me the time. I was always someone that people came and talked to. So I had lots of confidences shared with me, lots of problems, and just was a listening ear for people. When I retired, my husband said, "Right, are you going to do something about this?" So I did. I think sometimes he thinks I'm just Samaritan, not Meg. But it's a very fulfilling environment to be in.
Yeah,
And it's all about people,
yeah,
which is the biggest thing in my life.
yeah. That's a good summary. I mean, I guess at this point, I'll explain why I've asked Meg to come in today and talk about the service, and that's because I myself have been volunteering at Samaritans for around about the past year now. And I've witnessed firsthand how fantastic the service, specific to the podcast and the tradesman element and the mental health crisis within the building trades. I've looked at the service Samaritans provide and thought, I believe it's underutilized for the men in the trades. And I believe one of the contributing factors to that is that people don't really know the ins and outs of the service, how it works, the people behind it, who's answering the phone, where they're answering the phone, when to call. And I believe that if more people knew about the service and what it's there for, more people would use it, hopefully. And as you know, and I know from taking those calls, sometimes it can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
So we'll get into that, really. I mean, I guess the biggest question, or possibly the biggest anxiety for people that are considering, I mean, first of all, actually, at the start point, you can call Samaritans on 116 123. So that's the first thing to get out there. But for somebody that might be considering ringing Samaritans, when is the time to ring Samaritans?
When is the right time for them? When they feel that there's no one that they feel safe to share their thoughts with. It doesn't have to be suicidal thoughts. It can be anxiety. It can be worry about money, family, work. Just how do I get out of bed tomorrow?
Yeah.
That's the time to ring Samaritans. And it's different for every individual. Because when you ring the Samaritans, I would say probably the first thing you'll hear, I hope the first thing you'll hear, and the most important phrase I've ever used in my life, and people who work with me as a Samaritan almost expect this to come out of my mouth. But the most powerful phrase I've ever used is, Samaritans, can I help you? That's what you get when the phone is answered.
Yeah, well said, Meg. That is a good point to make. That is the first thing you'll hear.
It is. So you've then got a second to compose yourself. Some people put the phone down straight away, but they've made the first call because they got to that point. And that's that's what's right for you. That's when you've got to do it. As far as the time is concerned, you can ring 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and in this year, 366 days because it's a leap year.
Is it? I
So
didn't know that.
it's a bonus this year. So yeah, it's the right time is the right time for the individual, and the individual is the person who decides that.
Absolutely. I think that's a key thing to address, is that there's a perception that I've witnessed. Being relatively new to volunteering, and then I'm talking to my peer group and the people around me about the service, and you kind of get to hear people's preconceptions.
Yeah.
And one of those being the time to call Samaritans is when you are considering ending your own life, or, you know, literally stood on the bridge, as it were, which is an analogy that gets said a lot.
Yeah.
And what I think is really important is to get out there that actually, although that is the time to call Samaritans, we would definitely rather you call way before that. So when you're starting to think the thoughts and starting to feel a bit down, and just talk those thoughts over. And I think it's really important to get that out there, that the Samaritans are there to take the call way before then.
Absolutely.
Way before that point.
Absolutely. It's when, for me, the most important thing is when you've got no one that you want to talk to, no one that you feel you can open up and share your deepest thoughts with, because all the people you know you, and maybe you just don't want to share those dark thoughts or anxious thoughts. But you phone the Samaritans, and goodness knows, you might get Russ, you might get me. We're totally different, you know. Russ is a good-looking young man, and
I'll pay you later for that one, Meg.
Absolutely. And I'm a much older woman, and we've got everyone from young men and women through to older men and women. But the thing that we've got in common is we're anonymous. So you haven't got to look us in the face and maybe risk getting upset. People do get upset when they're talking to us, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. We're human beings. Emotion is not a bad thing. But there's that privacy, knowing that someone is there just listening to you, that they care enough to be there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. You know, all hours of the day, there's someone there who will just give you time to explore your feelings. They don't expect you to have any sort of idea of what you want to say necessarily, but just explore what's made you pick up the phone today. Because Samaritans don't give advice, but we give something far more powerful. We give you your voice to speak aloud. And oftentimes when you say something aloud, it's not half as bad as it is going round in your head. You know, we all have thoughts that go round in our heads. And if you actually say them out loud, you think, actually, no, I could deal with, I know I can think about, you know, it's that. So it's the power of someone being there just for you, and somebody who's got no preconceived ideas about you. They don't expect you to be macho man or superwoman. They just know you're a human being who's come to a bit of a difficult time.
There's no judgment, is there? I think
None
that's key.
at all.
And one of the things that you said there, I think, could be the potential barrier to people talking, is what you said, you know, talking to family and friends. People worry about judgment.
Absolutely.
How they're going to be perceived, how the information's going to come across. And one of the beautiful things, I believe, about Samaritans is the fact, and we'll go into this, that it's an anonymous service.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can testify to this. When a caller rings, we don't have a phone number.
No.
It doesn't come through with any details whatsoever. The only point where we would know any details is if the caller willingly gave them. So if you call, you're completely anonymous.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I guess, to touch on at this point, because another question I've been asked many times is, have you ever spoke to anyone you know when you've been on duty. And as you can testify, Meg, the likelihood of that happening is like you're probably more likely to win the lottery.
Yeah.
So the way that the Samaritan service works and the call centre works, the calls go into a central database, I guess, as it were, and then get distributed to volunteers that are ready and waiting to take the call. And Samaritans have branches throughout the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your call, if you ring and we're in the Midlands, so we'll use that as an example. So if you ring from Worcester, your likelihood of speaking to somebody from Worcester is slim. It's not impossible, but it's slim. You could be speaking to somebody in Liverpool, in London, in Devon, in Cornwall, wherever it might be. Your call is just routed to the next available volunteer. So it's not a localized service. When you call, you're not likely to speak to somebody you know. And we do get asked that. I've been asked that question several times. Is a caller will ring and ask, "Where are you?" And again, if you need to have that conversation, and that's a concern of yours, it's okay to ask that. And not only is it okay to ask that, but if you ring Samaritans and you speak to somebody for whatever reason that you're not entirely comfortable speaking to, you can simply hang up and call back.
Yes.
Which is, again, I think a key bit of information, because there might be people out there that are more comfortable speaking to a man or a woman or, different ages or whatever it might be, and you need to speak to a particular sort of person. I think people knowing that that's possible is also a key bit of information.
Yeah. I have to say, I've obviously been a Samaritan for longer than Russ. I've never taken a call from someone I knew. And I asked myself the question, how would I cope if I did? But it's anonymous. So even if I recognize someone's voice, I wouldn't say, "Oh, that's you, Russ. Is everything all right? Talk to me. Why aren't you what's going on?" If I picked up the phone in the office and I thought, "God, that sounds a lot like Russ," I wouldn't say a word. He would be a caller, an anonymous caller, in the same way as every other caller. It would only be if Russell said, "Meg, what are you doing answering my call?" Or said, "Actually, I'll ring back." That would be the caller's choice. So it wouldn't bother me at all. If it was a voice I recognised, I would never say to the person, "Are you feeling any better now?" Because they rang a Samaritan. They didn't ring Meg. They don't ring Russ. They ring a Samaritan.
Yeah.
And, that's how, certainly from my perspective, I would always have treated it. I said it's never happened. And I don't think now with the National Call Centre, and we've got 200 branches, the chances, as Russ says, are so unlikely. But, it's entirely the caller's choice whether they speak to that person who's answered the Samaritan phone, or they just put the phone down and say nothing, or say, "I'll call back." Because some people, I'm sure, have to ring a few times before they can actually speak. We can find that we answer a call and there's silence. And then it's up to us to give the person, let them be reassured that we're there and that we will stay there until such time as they want to speak, and give them the opportunity to get their courage together. And sometimes then the phone goes down. But that's part and parcel of what we do.
Absolutely, yeah. Like you said, some people need that little bit of time, and sometimes just hearing a voice the other end of the phone, that's step one.
Absolutely.
And again, because what I want to do here is almost break down or get word out there of all elements of the service. One of the things that you mentioned there is when you're in the office.
Yeah.
And that's another question that I've been asked. Do you work from home? But again, with today's day and age of mobile working, it's not an unreasonable thing to question. And again, there, I guess you'd have potentially data protection concerns. Is somebody sat at home, with their wife and kids around them and going to answer? So I mean, do you want to describe, Meg, how it actually works and where we work from?
Yeah, very happy to. Uh, Obviously, Samaritans now, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of Samaritans as a charity last year, and Worcester branch celebrated 60 years last year. So we're actually one of the oldest branches. And as well as caring for our callers, we also have to care for our volunteers. People wouldn't be Samaritans unless they cared passionately about it. There's extensive training. It said it's some of the best training in the world, and I wouldn't disagree with that. You don't become a Samaritan in 2 minutes. It takes over a year to get to the stage where we say, right, okay, now you're at a point where we feel you become a member of the branch and a full Samaritan.
Having recently been through that, I can testify to that. The training is fantastic. Really, really good. It's multi-dimensional. So some of it's online. You have online sort of work to do. I don't know. Is it still online at the moment? 'Cause I know that came in.
We're having a hybrid now.
A hybrid. So when I did the training, it was not long off the back of COVID.
Yeah.
So everything was online.
Yeah.
However, once that period ended, I came into branch. I was given a mentor who I then went through. Is it 8 sessions?
6 to 8, depending on the volunteer.
Terrible memory, me. So I had 6 sessions with a mentor, Sue, who was fantastic. And then it's only then that it's almost like getting your provisional license.
Yes.
You kind of go out on your own for a little bit, and then you do more training, and then eventually you get your number, as it were, to be a full Samaritan, which I'm very proud to hold now.
Yes, so, we don't use surnames. We all have our whatever first name we choose. I am actually Meg. And as far as Samaritans are concerned, I'm Meg 917. And you become inordinately proud of a number.
You do. I can testify to that. So I'm Ross 1084, which was ironically my year of birth as well. So I think it was meant to be that.
I hope it wasn't 1084.
Not quite 1084, no. I'll just claim the 84 part of that.
But yeah, so once we've been through training, we then do shifts in pairs. No Samaritan is ever on duty on their own. It's not allowed for lots of reasons, protecting our callers and protecting our Samaritans. Because if you have a call where someone is terribly distressed and maybe seriously contemplating taking their life, and that's everybody's choice, but we'd rather people didn't, not for lack of someone to talk to, at least. So 2 on duty protects the caller and it protects the Samaritan, because when you're working not sitting side by side, but close enough to know what's going on. If you hear someone's having a really tough call, then as soon as your call finishes, you go and sit fairly close to them so that they know you're there to support them. And as soon as the call is ended, you get the kettle on. Because we have to look after our own as well as our callers. So only ever 2 on duty at the same time. As well as the 2 of you in the branch, there's what we call a leader, another Samaritan who is based at home, where if there's a problem, maybe with a building, you can ring for help. We also have then what we call deputy directors who look after various and assorted things, including something that we call outreach, which is work that we do outside the branch. So if you ever use trains, you may have seen Samaritans on the railway station, particularly on the bluest day of the year, which is, I think, the 3rd Monday in January. And Samaritans, they're giving out tea bags to try and make people laugh at you, really, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So we do outreach work as well. So you may see Samaritans outside supermarkets, at fairs and fetes and all that sort of thing. we do things like this, which is
The
brilliant.
work Samaritans do is absolutely incredible. I mean, I've learned more about the organisation since becoming a part of the volunteer sort of team, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. It's not just taking calls; it's the outreach work and all the rest of it. But to echo, I guess, what you said about the support and the training and the way that it's set up, I think that's really important to know and to get out there for two perspectives. One, from the perspective of people using the service, so they know that it's anonymous, it's confidential, but also from the perspective of people that might be considering joining Samaritans as a volunteer, so they know how it works. Because me
Yes.
personally, because it wasn't all that long ago, I had heard of Samaritans. I think most people have heard of Samaritans, but I
Yeah.
didn't really know a lot about it.
No.
So when I joined, I kind of knew I wanted to do it, but I found out the answers to this along the way. I didn't know there was an office. I didn't know how long a shift was, where we'd be taking calls, what the support was like. And the support is fantastic. So to anybody who might be listening to this thinking, I think that would, that would be a bit of me, and that they might get something from volunteering, just know that the support is there. It is fantastic. You do hear some distressing calls. There's
You
no
do.
getting around that, but the support is always there from the people that you volunteer with, the leaders, and anybody. There's always somebody to talk to as a Samaritan. It would kind of be a
Yes.
bit hypocritical if there wasn't, wouldn't it, really? But the support is fantastic. The training's amazing. Obviously, it's not for everybody. But I guess it's a good point to bring up why I got into the Samaritans, really. So from my point of view, I've spent the last 22 years pretty much running my own business. So I've always been very business driven, financially driven, in terms of, looking after my family, provided where I need to provide. And a few years ago, I started studying psychology, and that led me sort of down a track of counselling. And I started to realise that there was possibly something missing from my overall picture. And the one thing that volunteering at Samaritans does for me, it gives me an incredible sense of purpose that is refreshingly not around money and business. And obviously, because it's a voluntary position, there's no pay involved. That is incredibly refreshing to me, because it gives me that sense of purpose, the sense of helping people. And, there's no... Quite a few people have said to me when I've mentioned Samaritans, oh, it's a really selfless thing to do. I find that quite hard to process, because I don't really think anything is selfless.
No.
In terms of, I go to Samaritans to volunteer because sometimes I come out of the office feeling fantastic for the difference that I've made to the callers. So it gives you something. It might not put anything in the bank, but it gives you something, to me, that's far more valuable. And that sense of purpose. I mean, how do you feel about it, Meg? What does volunteering for Samaritans give you?
Probably exactly the same. It's such a special feeling when you actually connect with someone and they do tell you everything that's worrying them. And I always describe it as, you answer the phone and someone, you can almost hear they're on their knees. Their voice is flat. They're drained. And during the course of maybe a half an hour telephone call, they tell you things about themselves and maybe say, oh, I didn't think I would tell anyone that.
Yeah.
But they've told you. And their voice is lifted a bit. And by the end of the call, they're thanking you for your help. And one of my things that I always felt and said to people has been, but I haven't done anything. I've just listened. And listening, people so underestimate the power of listening, the power of being a presence without offering advice, without giving guidance, just letting someone explore themselves. And when you get a call like that, it's just, you can't describe the feeling. It's just wonderful, because you can hear someone's voice change, you can hear a smile.
Yeah. No, that's a really
And
powerful
it's
thing.
just, it's very, very satisfying. We all accept it isn't for everyone. There are some people who just wouldn't cope at all, or would want to give advice, which is definitely a big no-no. Even if you know what you think the person should do, it's not yours to tell them.
Can I just ask at that point, Meg? Because I know the answer, I've been through the training, but there'll be people listening now thinking, well, why is that? The not giving advice thing. Because again, I think that's another misconception, is people I've spoke to have said, oh, well, do you tell them to do this? Do you tell them? I'm like, no, you can't. Because when you ring Samaritans, you are not told what to do or given, here's a solution. That doesn't happen. Can you explain why that is?
Because it's the caller-centered focus. Samaritans started, as I said, 70 years ago. And if Russ doesn't want me to say this, he's going to do this for me to stop.
You carry on, Meg.
But it was started by Chad Vara, who was a minister of religion. He had some wacky views as he got older, but as a young man, as a curate, he was appointed to a parish. And he went off his first day at this parish, got there in the pouring rain, and was told there was a funeral that he had to go and conduct. The funeral of a 13-year-old girl. So he said, well, how do I get to the cemetery? And off he went on a push bike in the rain. And he stood in the pouring rain, and this poor little girl, 13 years of age, had started her periods and thought she was dying. So she killed herself. And he made a vow, stood at that grave, that he would do everything in his power to stop people dying for want of someone to speak to. So that's the foundation. So it wasn't for, giving advice. It was for want of someone to go and tell your worries and fears to. And that's really carried on. We can signpost people if we think there's another agency that's better equipped to help them than us. Because, sometimes people need practical advice that we're not trained to do that. We are trained to listen and care and support. And it's very successful.
That's it. I think it's key, isn't it? When people are in times of crisis, a lot of the time, one of the great analogies I was told when I did my training was the tumble dryer of clothes analogy, which I'll tell you that now. So the analogy I was told was, when you listen to people talk about what's going on in their lives, a lot of the time it's like their emotions and their thoughts are a tumble dryer full of clothes. It's all running round and getting jumbled up, and it doesn't make any sense. And the power of just giving somebody a platform to talk while you listen actually enables them to take those clothes out of the tumble dryer, fold them neatly and stack them. They're still there, they don't go away, but they're now neat, they're organised, and they make sense. And that was a great analogy for me. And having witnessed it firsthand many times now, to testify that the power of simply just letting people talk, you don't have to give them a solution. Often they come up with a solution themselves. And very often that's exactly what will happen. They'll talk about everything that's going on in their lives, and then you get well, maybe I could do this actually, and maybe I haven't tried that. And often, it's just having that, as you said, the power of speaking out loud, of getting those thoughts and words out there. To me, it's like the weight of emotions, and it allows people to offload the weight for a period of time, that they can then pick it up and start moving forwards and working through whatever they're going through at that point in time. So that being the reason, in terms of, as you said, the other thing I wanted to actually touch on, when you said, so the core purpose of Samaritans is obviously to try to reduce and prevent, as it were, people taking their own life, because ultimately the goal is to reduce that.
Yes.
However, one of the key concepts that I guess potentially surprised me when I joined was the concept of self-determination with Samaritans. Can you explain a little about that one, Meg?
Absolutely. Yes, the goal of Samaritans is, from the very beginning, to hope that no one takes their own life because they didn't have anyone to talk to and share their worries and concerns, anxieties with. However, everyone is their own person. We would never, if someone, give an example, somebody rings and says that they've taken a whole load of tablets. First of all, it's a sharp intake of breath moment, but you can't make any sound. And then you try to explore when tablets were taken, were tablets taken, how many tablets were taken, and is this someone who is crying for help and wants help that we can get? If they tell us, yes, we want help, we can get an ambulance, as long as the caller's given us their name, their address, and a telephone number. It's no good just having a telephone number, because that means nothing to us. We can't trace the call. So they need to give full information. And some people, probably a lot of people, if they got to that point, they will say, yes, I want some advice, some help. But some people don't want to. But they want someone with them. And I'm sure Russ felt the same as I did. The thought of being on a phone with someone who's maybe, they're dying.
Made that decision, yeah.
And you can't do anything about it. It's really quite...
I think, again, because we're all humans, the other side of the telephone, and my first instinct before Samaritans would have been, if somebody tells me they're going to kill themselves, the first thing I will say is, don't do that. But that's not the case, is it? And the reason I wanted to get this message out there is certainly not to encourage it, but it's more from a point of view that, again, a barrier to the phone call could be, if somebody has decided that that's where they're at, they don't want to ring up and feel that they're going to be lectured and and try to talk out of where they're at. And hopefully during the course of a conversation, a caller might decide that they've changed their mind. And that's obviously what we hope for. But just on a similar point of view, if they don't decide that, then that's also to be respected.
And we will stay on the call. Because I can't think of anything more important and more of a gesture of kindness and humanity when somebody at that stage of their life wants a human being there, that you are that human being. And that's the only way I've ever been able to deal with that. It's terribly sad, but if in that person's last moments you were a friendly voice, a caring voice, there just for them, then I can do that.
Yeah, I guess the way I look at it is, it's actually a privilege.
Yes, absolutely.
It's an honour and a privilege to be that person at that point. But yeah, I mean, hopefully people don't get to that stage, obviously. But I do think it is important to have that message out there, that for people at that point, that they're not going to be bombarded with being talked out of it and sort of scolded, as it were, for being there. There's no judgment.
No, we don't give advice. No. We don't tell people they're wrong. We give people the opportunity to explore. And, we keep coming back. And I've no doubt this, would be a recurrent theme. If I sat here once a month with Russ, we keep coming back to, it's giving people the opportunity in a safe environment to explore everything. in their life that's concerning them or worrying them. And in actual fact, anyone can help someone who's struggling. I live in a small town not a long way away from here. And about 2 weeks ago, our local town social media, someone put a post on to the gentleman who was walking his dog near the railway line that morning. Thank you. What had happened was this older man was walking his dog and there was a young girl stood by the railway line. And he called out, oh, you're a bit close to there, my love, careful. She had been prepared to throw herself under the next train. It's a busy line. But him speaking to her broke the pattern. And one of our stock phrases, you'll see it at railway stations on our posters, is small talk saves lives. Because sometimes if someone is in that moment of, I'm going to do this, someone saying something about, oh, isn't it a horrible day? Or, oh, is the train late? Or, oh, I think it's going to rain. And I haven't got my umbrella with me. That's enough to break that pattern. And every single one of us, you don't have to be a Samaritan to do this.
Absolutely.
Everyone can just be that little bit mindful of what's going on around them.
I think that's a really key message, actually, Meg, is that you don't have to volunteer at Samaritans.
No.
I guess the overarching, anybody can be a Samaritan in their own right, in their own friendship circle, family circle. And I guess this is really key, actually, for the building trades, because it was a point that was made to me, because the message I'm putting out there is let's talk, let's get men talking.
Yeah.
But equally important is there has to be somebody to listen.
Yeah.
And the power of being a listener, essentially that's what makes us Samaritans. Now, you can do that for your friends, for your family, without being a volunteer at Samaritans. And the power of really listening. Yeah. Because I think the skill of listening, all too often people hear but they don't listen. So they'll hear something and they're already lining up what they're going to say, and that they want to get their point across. And it's been a fantastic skill, actually, that I've learned through working at Samaritans. I hope I've become a better listener outside of Samaritans as well as in. But I think to people out there listening, and to any chaps that are listening now or in the building trades, and you've got your mates, your gang members, your friends that are there, to be that ear that people know they can talk to. If just one person did that in every friendship circle, I think that would make a huge difference. Just being able to listen is a huge skill. And it's vitally important, because if we're all out there talking, great. I mean, that's an improvement on where we're at now.
Yeah.
But if nobody's listening and it's falling on deaf ears, it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah.
And you don't have to formally become a listener like Russ and I are. I've listened to people all of my life. My husband always says, as far as he's concerned, and he's known me an awfully long time, he said, you were born a Samaritan. It's just you're officially a Samaritan now. Because I've always cared about people. And I think there are an awful lot of people who are like me, but who don't want to get caught up in an organisation of any sort. They don't want the formality. But someone quite recently said to me, you listen, and nothing to do with Samaritans, someone who's becoming a very good friend said, you listen in a different way to other people. And that's the whole thing. You just have to tune in to what gifts you've got, because it is a gift to be able to listen and to be able to make people feel safe telling you. If you're someone who wants to tell, Tom down the road about what Joe's just told you, And there's that Pete. Oh, I know. Have I told you about him? Then it's not for you. Being a supportive human being is not for you, because it's not to gossip about. We don't talk about what we do. We don't talk about callers.
No.
You know, when Russ goes home at night or whenever he finishes his shift, the only person he would ever talk to about what's gone on is another Samaritan.
Yeah, and that's a key point, Meg. That's a key point. The Samaritan support system, essentially, at the end of the shift, you offload your calls to your leader. And what that do, I personally think of it as a purge. So it's like, okay, that's what happened. It's done now. And genuinely, again, it's a skill, and it takes some getting used to. But if you were to ask, I was on shift on Thursday, so only 2 days ago, 3 days. If you were to ask me what calls I took, I'd struggle to remember. Because I genuinely have got in this process now of, and it's not that they don't matter and that the people I listened to weren't sort of like valid, as it were. It's just being in that position, and you do take a lot of calls. It becomes a part of, and we have to offload it for our own sake. You can't take that home. Because it would become overwhelming. So that's a skill in itself. But it's a good point to make, is that it is policy that we don't talk about the calls when we get home, friends and family. You know, I talk to people about being a Samaritan, and you can talk generally, but you certainly don't talk about specific calls.
No. And that's the whole thing. It's not something, we don't take any pleasure or use any of the calls we take to chat about.
No.
Because that's not what it's about. We're there because we want to support people. And that's really important. And Russ is quite right. You know, it was said to me, you just leave everything that you've heard in the branch, in the building. You know, my husband, when I first became a Samaritan, used to say, especially if I'd been on a night shift, he'd wait up to know that I was coming home, you know, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. And he'd say, everything all right? Was everything okay? And I said, just don't wait up. Because I all I need now is a cup of tea, a bowl of cereal, my iPad for half an hour. You know, go to bed. Don't worry, I'm absolutely fine. Because there was no way on this earth I would tell him anything other than the number of foxes I'd seen on my way home. You know,
That's true.
but I think it takes people a while. And not that many years ago, you couldn't tell people that you were a Samaritan. That's a fairly new thing that we do actually say. And I think it's a good thing because, you know, I think with what Russ is doing, this is such an important new development to actually say to, you know, tradespeople. And I was surprised at the level of problem there is. I knew farmers were a problem. I knew that veterans had problems. But actually, why didn't I think about tradesmen? A lot of you work on your own, or, you know, two of you, or you're on a job, but you don't see each other all day because you're doing different things. You know, it's...
I think that's one of the things. I mean, to pull back a little, the talking about being a Samaritan thing, I was actually conflicted about that. And it was only recently, when I decided to do the podcast, I thought I'm going to start doing this because I've now got a platform where I can raise awareness of the service. I can let people know how it works and hopefully encourage more people that need to use it. So it had a purpose. But before the podcast, I didn't tell anyone. There weren't many people that knew I was doing it. I didn't post it on socials because I was a little bit hung up on the thought of virtue signaling. I didn't want to put it out there to, oh, look at me, aren't I a great guy because I'm doing this? So I didn't talk about it. And the whole reason I am now is because I've got an option and a way to raise awareness of the service. And having that first-hand experience, hopefully that gives people, you know, confidence in what I'm saying. So yeah, I do, like you said, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because at the same time, I think people should promote the service. But yeah, we certainly, you know, I don't go down to the pub at the weekend and talk about, you know, what I've been doing.
No.
So yeah, it's a valid point, Meg. Yeah. So with what you were saying regarding, sort of people coming into Samaritans,
Mm.
what makes a good Samaritan?
Someone who could listen. As I said, we're all shapes and sizes. We've got hugely varying backgrounds, hugely different experiences of life. But to be a Samaritan, you've got to care about people. You've got to want to help, I think is the biggest thing. And the helping actually is very simple if you care enough, because it really is. Being on a phone for our shifts are anything from 3.5 to 4 hours, or 3 hours to 4 hours. So you sit with a phone or a headset on, listening to other people. So the first thing you have to be is someone who likes people, who cares about people. If you don't, and if you want to get everything lined up in beautiful order, then you really need to have a hobby that, I don't know, stamp collecting, where order is important. You don't know who you're going to be talking to. You never know from one call to the next, but you have to have that care. And we've got about 85 Samaritans in Worcester. I don't think any two of them look alike.
It's a point I wanted to raise for that purpose, is that there's such a broad spectrum of volunteers that I've met, all different walks of life. And also, just to mention there, it is a 3 to 4 hour shift, but for anyone considering that this might be for you, I mean, to me, that sounds like a hell of a long time on the phone. But it's not continual.
No.
And it is in your control to accept a call.
Yeah.
So if you've had a particularly emotional call, you might want to take 20 minutes, half an hour to have a cup of tea, sit there and just, unwind, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And the same thing, if you are free to take breaks, there's no pressure, there's no expectation you must take X amount of calls per shift.
No.
Personally, I've had shifts where I've taken a high volume of calls, and I've also had shifts where I've taken 1 or 2 because they've been long calls. And that's another point. There's no time limit to anyone that needs to call. You're not going to be rushed off the phone with, well, you've got 10 minutes.
No.
The calls vary from 5 minutes to an hour and a half.
Yeah. Well, what we tend to say is for the caller and the Samaritan, really, when you get over an hour, the Samaritan has to be really careful, because you can get tired listening, and the caller can get exhausted as well.
Yeah.
So you sort of monitor the call, but sometimes you need a wee, and you've got to be trying to wind this call up because you really need to go to the loo. And sometimes I have said in the past, maybe if you have a cup of tea and a little bit of quiet, think about what we've talked about, and then ring back. Now, they'd get a different Samaritan, but because we're all trained in exactly the same way, the core of every Samaritan and their listening skills are pretty much the same.
It should be the same experience, shouldn't it?
And sometimes, having explored something with one of us, a break and a bit of a think and a grounding, and then speaking to someone else can be really good.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I think they're the important things. To be a Samaritan, you've got to like people. And you've got to be able to sit. I think it's hard to think, Russ, you and I sitting quietly listening when we're sitting here talking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? But actually, if you saw us in the office, you'd realise that we can be really quite quiet sometimes. So but only the individual knows whether it's something they want to do. You wouldn't do it if you didn't really care.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. One of the things that you were starting to touch on as well, and this is a question, and you'd already started to answer it in one respect, but a question that I'm asking all of my guests, because of the situation within the building trades, and it's a statistic that I'll keep raising, because the more people that are aware of it, the better. But currently, as I see it, on a governmental level, there's nothing really being done. But 75% of people that take their own lives are men. And within that, if you're working in the building industry, the demographic of the UK trades, you're actually at present 4 times more likely to take your own life. It is the worst demographic of industry in the UK. So the statistics of people taking their own lives coming out of the building trades are higher than farmers, higher than vets, who also, and that's not discounting anybody,
No.
Anybody taking their own life is tragic, and it's not a game, it's not top of the charts here, but there is a problem. Why do you think the building trades are so adversely affected in comparison to other industries?
I think it's considered to be a very macho working life. And, emotionally and sociologically, we're evolving. And, men having to have the stiff upper lip, I hope has gone forever. I really do. But there are still areas. And I think, the men who work in the building trade, they like to think they're real men, and they can cope with things. I might be totally wrong, and you tell me, right?
No, I think you're touching on it, Meg. I mean, it's that definition, isn't it, of what constitutes a real man?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think at the moment in today's society, that's more up in the air than ever.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of men that feel victimized and that they don't have a place in today's society. I mean, that's a whole conversation in its own right.
Yeah.
But I mean, you were saying before again about working on people working on their own, the solitude, the loneliness.
Well, it's I mean, if you think about it, I've been very privileged in my working life to have been involved with some building projects. And there were loads of men working. But when you look at it, they're all working on their part of something.
Yeah.
So there's usually loud radios blaring, but there's no conversation as such.
No. So
how would they, even if they thought, oh God, I really need to talk to somebody, I feel I'm going out of my head. And then, oh, no, you can't do that. I can see how, but it had never registered that was something.
That was a problem.
Yeah. You think of a guy laying roof tiles.
Yeah.
He's up far more feet in the sky than anyone should be. He's got to get on. He's got to get so much of this done. And he's on his own in a dangerous situation. And if he's in a bad place mentally, that's not good.
No. It's often that's exactly often it. It's often high pressure.
Yeah.
And pressure, then you end up cutting corners when it comes to safety.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of doing this. I mean, fortunately now health and safety is far better than it ever has been. But it's still up to you to toe the line on that. And years gone by, some of the things I used to do, the things working off ladders and, save a few minutes by not moving the ladder. You lean over with one leg hanging off the ladder and you God knows how many feet in the air. And the pressure, I believe, of the industry adds to that.
Yes.
And then you've got the stress of having to do it.
Yeah.
So, I used to go home at night sometimes and think, Jesus, what was I doing?
Yeah.
It is, there are all these elements and I wish I knew a solution. At the moment, all I can think to do is to highlight them, highlight the problems, get people's perspective and opinion on why, in the hope that somewhere there'll be some change. I'm not quite sure how.
But it is happening, Russ. You've got men in sheds. You've got some of the... I was at a conference a couple of years ago and he was... I'm sure he was an ex-rugby player. I think he started the Men in Sheds.
Okay. What's Men in Sheds?
It's men talking to men,
Okay. Yeah.
just going along, and it started off in a shed.
Right. Okay.
I think it's encouraging men to actually allow themselves to be human.
And not be seen as weak.
Yes, okay, they're partners, they're dads, they're sons. They're trying to be all these strong things. And actually strength is showing you weakness.
Yeah. I completely agree.
I've got 2 grown-up sons. And I don't think they'd hate me for saying they've each had a bad time over the last couple of years. But when I had sons, I was determined they weren't going to shake hands, and they weren't going to shake their father's hand.
Yeah.
If they were upset and they needed someone to cry with, they could go to their father.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I feel quite thrilled that that's happened. And now these are 2 grown-up men. But when they've had bad times over the last couple of years, they've been open, they've talked to each other, they've supported each other, they've cried with each other.
Yeah.
And they have both come to their dad and me and cried with us, and we've all cried together. And we're not a wimpish family, not at all.
I think that's
but
fantastic.
I just wanted my boys to know that they could tell us anything and we would always love them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't strong to not show your emotion.
No.
It's just damaging. So I know, I don't know how many people will see this podcast, but if I could give every one of them something, it's talk to as I hit the microphone,
That's okay.
talk to someone who either you don't know and you can't see and will never see again, but tell them how you feel. And if you get upset, that's not bad. Yeah. That's quite healthy, actually. If you've got someone you trust in your life who you're not frightened to show your emotion of, is your mate the person who actually you could talk to? He would still respect you if you said to him, I just don't know how I can carry on.
Yeah.
The guy who's maybe doing the same sort of job as you and has got the partner at home and the kids at home, and, there's money needed for this or that. Talk to the man beside you who you've worked beside for months or years, who might be in exactly the same place.
Yeah.
Be a bit more open with each other, a bit more honest with each other.
I think that's incredible advice.
There's no shame in showing emotion. There's no shame in feeling overwhelmed. That's the world we live in. And there are people who care.
And both ways as well. Be the person that person can turn to. Be the person that will listen and not make the other person feel shamed or weak
absolutely.
or inferior for doing that.
Yeah.
The perception of strength needs to be addressed, I believe.
Yes.
But yeah, you've given some incredible advice there, Meg, I think. And you've hit the nail on the head, really. I think the dynamic that you've explained that you've got with your sons, that's kind of how it should be, really. And being able to, because no matter what you do, life isn't easy. It's going to throw things at you.
No.
But being able to talk it over, put the pressure down, take the lid off now and again to alleviate that pressure, that's where things become overwhelming if you haven't got that option. And obviously Samaritans is one service out there that can help with that. As Meg said, if you've got nobody in your own circle, or even if you have, even if you're not ready to put that, take that cape off of being Superman and being the alpha male, if you're not ready to take that mask off in front of your friends and family, do it with a stranger.
Yeah, do it anonymously. Russ or I would sit and listen.
Absolutely.
And we'd nod in all the right places because we'd both nod. I've noted as we've gone through this. We would sit there, and there are, how many is it? 2,200 Samaritans? 22,000 Samaritans.
22,000. Wow.
And last year, there was not 1 minute, 1 second of the day when a Samaritan wasn't taking a call, which, is an incredible statistic.
It is.
But 22,000 people all care enough about you to be there if you need to speak to someone.
Yeah.
Just please talk to them. And over time, I'm sure things will change, because men like you, Russ, doing what you're doing now with this, you're bringing it out.
Thank you. I hope so.
Absolutely,
I hope so. That's the whole purpose of the podcast, is to reach the ears it needs to, and also the people that aren't ready to talk yet, but just to let people know that potentially what they're feeling and going through is normal.
Yeah,
and there's
absolutely.
so many other people out there going through the same thing, and that life isn't easy, it's hard. And things come at you, and it's not just you, it's everybody's affected. And hopefully this podcast will reach those ears, give people the options, and I'm going to continue to raise and spread the message of Samaritans and the service that's out there, in the hope that the right person will hear and think, actually, I could do with that. I could do with that phone call. 116123.
I was just going to say the same thing. Absolutely.
So hopefully this podcast in particular, it will be up there for eternity now, Meg. You'll be immortalised on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere else.
How scary is that?
But I'd like to take this opportunity now again to thank you very much for your time in coming in, talking about the service. You've put some really poignant, powerful messages out throughout the course of the conversation. Is there anything that you would like to finish up on saying?
Just to say that the help is there. The ears are there to listen. We will nod and agree with you, even though you can't see us nodding. And, please don't be ashamed, embarrassed, or afraid to share your worries and anxieties. Do it while you feel in control and able. Give yourself a gift and pick up that phone. As Russ said, 116123. And hopefully you'll hear a voice saying, Samaritans, can I help you? Which might just make a huge difference. And I also want to say how proud I am of Russ, because he's one of my Samaritans.
Oh, thank you.
And I think he's doing a sterling job, and he cares really passionate about this. So I wish all of you folk, all of you tradesfolk, be kind to yourselves and look after yourselves. And thank you, Russ.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks. Right. Well, if you've enjoyed the podcast, or more importantly, if you've listened to this and thought that somebody that you know could do with listening, please point them in the direction. And you can help us out. You can do your little part for the podcast by simply giving it a like, a share, a follow, share it on your socials, subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening to, because it all helps with the growth of the podcast. So thank you very much for listening.